while we are not currently in the United States, we all are representing the work of U.S. individuals and organizations and the government that have benefited as a result of settler colonialism. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples were adopted by the UN General Assembly, and in solidarity with the indigenous nations and communities of these lands, we would like to ground our work here together in the articles of that declaration. We encourage you all to reflect on the historical legacies held in the lands that you occupy. So I think everyone in this room would agree that to truly make sustained, just, and robust change, we need people and we need sectors collaborating together and working and learning together. We need students learning in classrooms that center them, their future, and provide opportunities to take learning into the community. We need pathways and training for green careers. And we need networks, coordinating and creating connections between all of this work. For those of you new to this, these things have a name: Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE. And what's even more exciting is that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change from the very beginning recognized ACE as critical by including Article 6, that seeks to reduce the impacts of climate change by enabling society to be a part of the solution. Education and training are integral in enabling citizens' contributions to local and global efforts to meet the climate change challenge. And this was further reaffirmed in the Paris Agreement, Article 12. Unfortunately, for years, ACE has been thought about just as education, and ACE is about so much more. It's about justice, it's about participation, whole of society, whole of government. ACE builds capacity and grows and supports systemic change. ACE wasn't invented by the UNFCCC, though. This work is substantial and robust and has been around for a really long time, which you will hear more about today from Deb Morrison. Unfortunately, ACE work in the US has the challenge of incoherence and disconnect. And while we are attempting to merge new intentionality, bringing new people in that we've historically not worked with, there's still a lot of work to do. Isatis Cintron Rodriguez will be providing some more insight into this, as well as Haley Krim as she shares the formation of the US ACE Coalition. ACE is all about centering people. So what would this hour be like without hearing from some people? Doing ACE, including our panelists here, live in person, as well as Sherry Mitchell, the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation. Hey, Sherry. Frank Neopold, an ACE national focal point for the US, and Felicia Davis, founder of the HBCU Green Fund to help finance green projects at historically Black colleges and universities. You can find our bios and social information at the usacecoalition.org under COP26. And with this, I'd like to pass it on to Isatis.
Hello?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think what brings me to ACE, I think it's so important to talk about people-centered action, because we often talk about inclusivity, but what we need to be doing is centering people. Our disadvantaged communities have been working for years in innovating and implementing transformational solutions. So when we talk about that, we need to recognize that this has been a reality because we have not been given any other opportunity or any other option than to survive. So I think it's fair to say that COVID-19 has made us all rethink the way that we relate to each other, but also how our institutions further crises, and how can we reimagine how we emerge and rebuild a much more resilient future. So when we talk about that, we go into reflect on climate action, and that is it is asking for a new kind of governance, and governance that is people-led and that leaves no one behind. So this, as Kristen was saying, this ACE climate empowerment is reflected in the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement and Article 6 of the Convention. So that means that from 1992, parties have recognized the importance of public participation, capacity building, workforce development, and international cooperation to achieve the targets of mitigating climate change, to be honest. So when we talk about, and that's a word that is being thrown in all climate action recently, when we talk about whole of society, we're actually talking about ACE, because we need to be having an informed society that has active pathways to participate in climate solutions. But then when we also talk about whole of government, we're also talking about ACE, because I would like us to flip that narrative that learning and capacity building is something that we provide our communities, but in reality, our communities have so many things to give us and policymakers to learn from. So access to information, capacity building, and training are things that our policymakers need to make sure that the policies that we have are coordinated and have the coherence that we need to scale climate action at the level that we need. So I think that about climate empowerment is that when you ask communities that might not know about ACE, they know that this is what it takes. This is what it takes to implement climate action. So I think with that, it's kind of contextualizing why ACE is important in the Paris Agreement, and some of the articles of the Paris Agreement that need ACE are, for example, if we talk about carbon markets, we know that to ensure the environmental integrity and social safeguards of the carbon mechanisms that may be implemented, we need transparency and robust accounting. That means data. So that means also access to information. And furthermore, when we're talking about carbon prices that have been implemented with lack of participation, then we get to social instability and social unrest that has been only been solved by implemented broad society measures, broad society participation measures. But that is only after, right, as our response to this unrest and its implications. So I think it will be much easier for everyone and much cost effective if we would implement public participation from the policy design through the public implementation. So I think this is the power of ACE and why we need ACE acting as a lens through which we implement all climate action.
Thank you, Asatis. In thinking about that, one of the things to really understand, and as you named, was really understanding the roots of ACE in the United States. In 1991, the first Peoples of Color Summit for Environmental Justice met and codified a set of principles, 17 principles for environmental justice. These principles are they're rooted on deep histories in place across the United States. They're rooted in deep histories across the world. And they are themselves the roots of climate justice principles globally. The 2002 Bali principles that define 27 climate justice principles were based on these American principles that were defined. So really important when we think about these histories that we understand these roots in environmental justice efforts and how they have sort of gone on and gone forward. In terms of the ACE Coalition and the formation of the ACE Coalition, this work is rooted, again, in communities action, civic action in the United States and across the space in tribal nations. Decades and decades of organizing work by many that you'll hear from today, both in civil society and in and across the government at different scales. And so in the past 10 years, things started to coalesce more as the ACE program got defined. And in 2019, in the fall of 2019, without any funding, actually, because it was very difficult to get this type of coherence funding in place, we went ahead as a civil society volunteer organization and pulled together networks. So what we're thinking about at that time was we know that we work in relationality to each other. We have for a long time. And so trying to figure out how to weave these organizations more coherently together, as Asatis was saying, and more structurally together. We really are very grateful to the Spencer Foundation for providing some initial funding and helping participants in the justice community actually be supported financially to participate in the work. And then we spent, with a huge number of volunteers, we spent 6 or 8 months during the COVID pandemic. We adjusted as it unfolded and held community dialogue processes. Both Asatis and Frank and others were involved in just having conversations and opening up discussions, and we really are grateful to so many. And then Felicia Davis, as we'll hear shortly, and Asatis, continued those conversations and expanded them into the BIPOC community, specifically with some work that the HBC Green Fund was doing. So we're very grateful for that. The product of that effort, the initial product of that effort, was something called the National Strategic Planning Framework, and it can be found at aceframework.us. And we do encourage folks to read that. We really tried to hold the voice of communities. So sometimes you'll hear things that might be contradictory, and that is as it should be. So, and that process has led to the creation of 2 focal points in the United States. So there's 2 ACE focal points. We'll hear from one today, and we're very excited for that work. And then maybe the last thing to name, and we'll hear more about this today, was the extensive work that Sherry, Felicia, Asatis have done, and many others have done to expand the way in which Black, Indigenous, people of color leaders are naming issues of environmental justice specifically in this work, and having those voices be central to this effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. So to expand a little bit on the framework and the coalition development process, in August of 2020, last year, we held dialogues over the month of August with over 400 organizations and individuals from around the country. They were run by civil society, not as a government effort, but the entire thing was run under the guidelines of the UNFCCC ACE guidelines to ensure that it was comparable to what other countries are doing and useful and accessible to people around the world. As part of those dialogues, we had a first one, which was an introduction, where we focused on the fact that we are breaking silos in this work. We are stopping talking only to climate education people, if you're a climate education person, and we are going to bring in communication and public health and voices from all kinds of communities that may not be in your normal orbit in these conversations to create a framework that truly represents the landscape of ACE in the US. So as part of that, we had 4 dialogues afterwards. Everyone from every background, every expertise was invited to participate in each one. The first was around transformational learning and engagement, then inclusive and responsible community engagement, training a climate-ready workforce, and lastly, national, indigenous, and international cooperation. As Deb said, after that, we wrote the framework based on the sharing and the wisdom that was in those meetings. And there were 3 rounds of review of that by participants to ensure that what they shared was accurately reflected in the framework, and also by experts who were not involved but are recognized as leaders in their respective fields to ensure that we were reflecting the best of current science and learning and the academia in our development of the framework. So that was published in November of last year. As Deb said, the event around climate justice was in April, which explored climate justice and the Justice 40 initiative announced by the Biden administration through a lens of ACE. So that was one of the first events put on and led by Felicia that included ACE as a core framework of it. And what came out of all of these discussions was a desire to work together and do it ourselves, not wait for government or funding necessarily as much as we could, but to use all of the knowledge, all of the networks, all of the experience that we have as a group to work together, organize ourselves, increase each other's impact, expand across into new communities, new boundaries, new states, and really work together on climate action across the country and create a network of people working and committed to this groundbreaking, silo-breaking, community engagement and empowerment work. So that I'm super excited to announce that as of today, the US ACE Coalition has 46, I believe, organizations and 68 people across 26 states, Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., committed from all different backgrounds, all expertise, evenly balanced across the 6 pillars of ACE as laid out in the UNFCCC, as well as climate justice and equity, which came out of our conversations as a core principle of our work and is critical to any climate work. And so you can see up there a map of where we're from. We also have allied organizations in countries around the world, and we are excited to launch today and begin working on this and empowering society across the country. Thank you.
Thanks, Haley. And thank you to all 3 of you for providing such a great, yay! I don't want to steal your thunder. All right. Thank you all for providing such great grounding in ACE history and context and the foundation of our coalition, which I hope every single person in this room is going to join at the end of today. Well, I'm excited to kick off our storytelling section with a little bit about my work at Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy, where I'm the Senior Director of Programs. Climate Generation was founded in 2006 with a mission to empower individuals and communities to engage in solutions to climate change. And we do this by igniting and sustaining the ability of educators, youth, and communities to act on the systems perpetuating the climate crisis. The principles of ACE are embedded in the DNA of our organization that recognized from the beginning that educator, youth, and public engagement were critical to accelerate the whole of society action that was needed. While many environmental nonprofits are focusing just on educators or just on youth or just on community, we intentionally work across audiences, integrating our 3 pillars centering anti-racism and systemic equity, combating misinformation, and personalizing and localizing climate action. Our Teach Climate Network supports over 8,000 educators, bringing climate change and green STEM career education to more than 1 million students, supporting a network of 14 regional cohorts to develop climate-confident climate change educator leaders. We support youth-driven leadership through our YA program, where students engage in public policy and local action projects for climate justice. And we work with individuals to develop their climate story and use it as a tool for action in our work, knowing that connecting heads and hearts on the climate issue makes it personal, local, and inspires action. Being a part of building the US ACE Coalition has connected us to partners and opportunities to bring in all the elements of ACE, as well as the 3 cross-cutting elements of youth, gender equity, and justice. While we have been doing this work for over 15 years, it was only recently that we began to understand that our work was ACE. I think many of you would agree that those of us that work in climate change education and engagement often feel like our work is seen as just extracurricular activity, but not something critical with an often times unmeasurable impact. Knowing that this work is officially named as critical for climate action by the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement gives it credibility and power, and a network like this provides us access to opportunity and learning and collaborating that we didn't have before. I'd love Sherry to step up now and share. Sherry, can you hear us? Yay, go for it.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be with you. Kwe, Sidawin, Andeli Wisi, Wana Homogwasit, the Najio, Banawabskewi, and Delnabama Gawasus, no Banawabskewi, Nagakaka Gos Niltibayik. Hello, everyone. My name is Sherry Mitchell. I am from the Penobscot Nation. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Tibayik. I'm the executive director of the Land Peace Foundation, an Indigenous-owned organization that's committed to preserving and promoting the Indigenous way of life, which includes the protection and preservation of Indigenous land, water, religious, and/or spiritual rights, the proliferation of cultural and traditional practices, strengthening of kinship roles, and preservation of ceremonial ways of being. I want to talk in my brief time about the importance of including Indigenous knowledge and wisdom traditions into climate action and climate mitigation and adaptation, climate change mitigation and adaptation. And to just give a brief comment, there's so much that could be said about why Indigenous peoples are key partners in ACE. Indigenous knowledge is based on millennia-long studies of the complex relationships that exist between all systems within creation. It encompasses a broad array of scientific disciplines: ethnobotany, climatology, ecology, biology, archaeology, psychology, etc. And the keepers of Indigenous knowledge carry thousands of years of data on things such as medicinal plant properties, biodiversity, migration patterns, climate changes. We have such strong relationships with our ecosystems that and have lived in relationship with those ecosystems for so long that we're often on the front lines of recognizing changes within those systems. And we carry the stories of countless epochs of human history within our own territories, going all the way back to the beginning of human life on Earth. We also provide insights that help fill the gaps between our physical and subjective experiences, helping us and helping others to understand how our internal consciousness impacts the ways that we view and experience the external world. In scientific terms, we talk about confirmation bias and all of these other terminologies. And so how do we fill the gap between those physical and subjective experiences? And Indigenous knowledge systems have systems and structures in place embedded within our traditions that help to navigate those things. And so in recent years, we've seen this increase in outreach amongst the scientific community toward Indigenous knowledge systems. And though we see this as a positive move, we want to walk carefully to ensure that Indigenous knowledge doesn't get swallowed into the narrow confines of Western science. And so the challenge for science has always been to see beyond the confines of the hierarchical, reductionist, compartmentalized thinking, this commodification and compartmentalized thinking, to see the holistic patterns that are present in the world around us. And when we see the world through an Indigenous lens, we're forced to take a world-centered view that recognizes the relationships that exist between every living system and the many ways that these systems are constantly moving toward harmony and balance. We can learn a lot from those systems. Unfortunately, a great deal of critical Indigenous knowledge has remained outside of the confines of this Western scientific parameters, making it very difficult for those who have been trained to see the world in fractured pieces to see a holistic view of the world. And so that's one of the things that I think is most important for Indigenous peoples to bring to the table, is a more holistic view of the world, but also an interrelated, interconnected view of the world that actually honors and acknowledges the sovereign right that every living being has to exist and to coexist, and the responsibility that we have as human beings to coexist with all other living beings as co-equals. If we truly hope to align Indigenous knowledge with Western thought in order to address the crises of our times, mainstream thinkers will have to be courageous enough to challenge the barriers that have prevented Indigenous knowledge from coming forward previously. And I think that one of the greatest challenges that we have is in our attempts to think about climate solutions in a way that moves beyond Western values, because Western values are often hard to define. When you ask somebody what is a Western value, they say baseball and apple pie, right? So how do we actually define an ethic, rights-based ethic going forward that moves beyond these boundaries and these parameters that have been established in rights-based models that are more geared toward capitalism and commodification, and less geared toward honoring the sacredness of all life, toward an indigenous value system that really recognizes that all life is both sovereign and interdependent, and that each element within creation, including humans, has the right and the responsibility to respectfully coexist. And so I'm very proud that we are able to be a part of the ACE discussions and that we've been a part of framing this structure and the system. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue that conversation long into the future and do what's needed for us all to work together to save Mother Earth. Thank you very much.
So in addition to my work with the ACE Coalition, I also work with local governments. And so I'd like to speak a little bit about how ACE helps local governments achieve their goals and help citizens work more effectively with local governments. So ACE is absolutely critical to national and subnational work, no matter what side you work on. If you're a citizen pushing for your government to do more, or if you are a local government or state government leader trying to enact climate and justice legislation or programs in your community. So as a citizen, ACE can help you to mobilize support from your community behind just community-led climate actions. And it catalyzes people to take actions in their own houses and schools and places that they work. Everywhere they go, having an ACE lens focused on communication, coordination, engagement, education will help you make your argument more effectively and help people reach out to their own government more effectively to support citizen work in advancing climate action. From the other side, as a government, ACE will build support within your community for projects that you would like to do and push you to do more and be responsive to what the community goals are around climate and climate justice. It also encourages people to get engaged through public participation and inspires people, again, to take their own action to reduce their emissions and prepare, adapt for climate change across your community. So taking a little bit of pressure off the government. ACE enables people to elect climate champions and hold them accountable to their true goals and to enacting just and equitable solutions in their community that they serve. It also works outside government to spur just and locally relevant climate action on every scale, every place. As a small example, I worked in Park Forest through AmeriCorps in the south suburbs of Chicago, and as an example of amazing public participation, they had a civic leadership academy that introduced citizens to one government department every month. As part of that, the Sustainability Office, where I worked, gave a presentation on local climate impacts and forecasting and ways that they could get involved in their local government to mitigate and adapt for climate change. Immediately after that presentation and for months afterwards, people would come up to me and my colleagues in the Sustainability Office and talked about how they never thought about climate change. They didn't feel it was urgent, but after seeing the impacts it's currently having and will have on the place that they love, they now would be involved in their local government and in their own community to push for just and community-led climate action. So that's just a very small example of how public participation, access to information, and education can work together with local government and community to advance climate action. And I'll pass it back to you.
That's awesome. I think, can you hear me? Yeah. As Haley, and I think as many here, we wear many hats. And I think, like, as a true environmental PhD student, because we think that we can change the world, right? So I'm a climate engagement specialist. So that's what brought me to the USA's coalition. But I also work in the Citizens Climate International, empowering individuals to influence policy making. So in this role, I have also created a citizen assembly to create an Puerto Rico NDC, and this is coming from the perspective that the US NDC does not reflect the needs and priorities of the people of our island, and moreover, the colonialist powers have actually furthered the vulnerability of our people by setting austerity measures that take away our essential services, and that takes away, like the focus into climate action, because where the funding is going to come from. If we are fighting for having quality education, quality healthcare, and housing, like there's still houses from Maria that still don't have a roof. So this citizen assembly is a series of dialogues or e-consultations that are happening right now in parallel to this COP. So people are creating a national strategy for and by Puerto Rico that elevates both the contributions that non-state actors have been leading and spearheading for years, but that go unnoticed. So basically what we do is that we set up a set of principles and then go through what are the priority areas that we should work. And this, like, as we know, Puerto Rico is not part of any of these conversations. They do not take part of the United Nations or regional conversations because of our status. So they don't know anything about ACE. But in conversation, the main principles that came out was public participation, transparency that talks, transparency and access to information, education, and accountability that speaks through the whole spectrum of ACE elements. So in this, what we're aiming to is to create this NDC that centers people, because the communities and the people that are closer to the problem are the people that have the solutions. So I think we have seen that ACE is a cross-cutting issue, or a cross-cutting implementation need for all climate action. So we're super excited for this process and super excited to be here and see what develops.
So as we talk about ACE, many of you might be thinking, so what about education, right? Like, where is education specifically? Because a lot of people think about ACE and think about K-12 education. So I want to share with you the work in the state of Washington. Believe it or not, Washington and not New Jersey was the original state to engage in climate change education systemically across the state and implement. We are in our 4th year of implementation for Governor Jay Inslee's effort that was around supporting educators, community and school-based, to work together and collaborate and think differently about what education could be, where we educate youth, how we educate them, who's involved in that process, and how we actually start thinking more broadly about education, to things that Sherry's mentioned, to other things that have been named, that we broaden out education to think about public participation, to think about whose education, whose science are we talking about, how are we understanding different ways of being and doing and learning together. And so in Washington, the Climb Time effort, and you can find all about it at climbtime.org, that effort has been bringing together community-based educators, tribal nations, government, business, and school-based educators to work together in a network effort. So it's an infrastructuring effort, how we coherently do it. The way that it's been working is that the state of Washington has been legislatively granting $3 million a year into the effort. And that is a drop in the bucket for what needs to happen, but it is the only one that I know of that is like that is happening. And we need that in all states and across all disciplinary and content areas. We need to break those silos. So that's a little bit about what that work is. That work has centered in justice, and it's been expanding even how we think about it, not just what we study inside that space, but again, to many of the things that have been said here today, to really think about who's involved, how are we defining power relationships in that, how are we decolonizing education foundationally in that work, and how are we thinking about who's learning. So many of the things that has been going on is educators themselves have been learning about issues of justice in the work. So that's very, very important across all of the efforts. And now I will pass it over to Felicia Davis.
It's working. Testing. Microphone check. So as you can see probably from my hair, I've been attending COPs since COP26, and which was The Hague, and I thought there would be a solution completely by COP10. And so now fast forward, and when I look up at the screen, I see Frank, and I kind of encountered him before we had this commitment to a whole of government response. But when I started, the year 2000, climate justice was what got me on board. And nobody within the arena thought, they said, oh, that'll come later. You know, it was Kyoto Protocol, 3 pollutants, 4 pollutants, So some of us that work on climate justice said that climate can't be solved without putting justice at the center. And when we talked about equity, we meant equity within a domestic and global frame. So that could be community by community and nation by nation, and we needed to do some work in that arena. And even my good colleagues here, I hang out with them because they let me, but which is an accomplishment for me. But in thinking about climate solutions and justice, and why climate justice advocates put justice at the center, is that there's a whole host of challenges that spin off from our use of technology, right? And that's in different generations. But justice for people is a human consideration, right? And it requires that we think in the same way about all people, which is very difficult to do culturally, personally, individually, collectively. But this group, ACE, comes together to do that. And what's most impressive to me is the energy is largely voluntary, right? I'm quite cynical about paid efforts. And it's not that I don't think that people should get paid for work, but I've just seen people get off of one train and on the next train moving. And with ACE, it's a commitment to collective work and struggle and justice, and within the context of knowing we have to turn a really big ship. In my opinion, I don't like to say that things have failed, but I don't think industry has done something that I would call success on climate. I don't think governments have done anything that I would call success. I won't say that it's a failure, but after 20 years, the conversation, well, the booths are much nicer. They're doing it. I didn't go to Paris. I was in Copenhagen, so these booths are lovely. But in terms of the conversation is rich, the words are interesting, but the action has been lacking. And so I've decided governments may fail, industry may fail, but the people won't. And so ACE is about the people. And so now it does mean, no offense to all of you, are just lovely, and the room is filled. For those of you that are at home and can only see me, it has a lot of ivory people, and a few cream colored, and some others. But we have to have a richer, more robust mix. It's also, which I like, gender balanced, because there's only a few guys in here. So, and that works for me. But from the U.S. perspective, gender is an issue we've not tackled well, right? I'm 5'2". I still see things. If I have to stretch, some people could bend down. You know, if I'm going to be largely responsible for care, then things need to be adjusted to caregivers, right? So that, and then if we think in a global context, and I don't want to go over my minutes, a finger will go up and I'll know to stop. But these are things that we've got to be about it, right? And I'm not trying to sound eloquent. I arrived this morning. I forgot my snacks at the airport. So at this moment, I'm just challenging you all to step up. Whatever it is that you think you've been doing, forget that, because it was minimal. Think of your life being at risk, right? And think of being all in. Look at this thing. The United States is back in the Paris Agreement, back at COP, and ready to go all in on. Ready to go. Who does this? Frank, I'm available. Ready to go all in, right? I'm all in. I came to the party in the year 2000 all in. I'm a social justice activist. I got arrested last week. I'm here this week. So, and I came to this from working on other social justice issues, but once I'm convinced this is the most important issue for humanity, all in, I couldn't get out. And we cannot allow these ridiculous conversations. And we have to call, I promised my daughter I wouldn't say bad words, but we have to call bullshit when we see it. Right? When this stuff is funky, we cannot allow it. When folks don't get on board, and we got to go running around, I don't like to be embarrassed. So I got to get to West Virginia and let folks know, not on my watch. It's like, look, no one person's more important than any other, and humanity together, we tip the balance. So, but we have to make that known. So I'm not going to say more, except to say that ACE is the place where it all comes together. And without networks, we can't turn this ship in the U.S. And we're the drag. We're the drag on the planet. And we can stop. And like I say, I'm very competitive. I don't like having to go around the world, being the bottom of the bucket, being the problem, being the cause, and then we want to strut around as though we're leading anything. Not acceptable. So I came here basically to say this, so I could actually go back tonight, because I know you are, I can see the talent in the room, I see the commitment, and I appreciate that in my heart. Because 20 years in, we need that, but not enough. So with that, I'm going to toss it to Frank, that's the guy that got me to hang with it. Because I was like, you know, vanilla people are never serious long. But Frank promised that he was in it. He was going to be focal point. He was going to get John Kerry. Biden would be elected. We were going to be back, and he was going to put it on the wall. And you did that, so I give you Frank.
Wow, Felicia, that's a setup right there. Just to be clear, that is not at all the case. A little bit. So let me give you a little bit of who I am. Good afternoon, good morning. It's still more, but it's actually afternoon here too. I'm Frank Niepold. I'm one of the 2 ACE focal points for the United States. I'm a technical expert who works on ACE-related actions within the United States. Olivia Bansky from the State Department is the other ACE focal point, brand new as of March of this year, who focuses on leading the international delegation. She's with you at COP26. She's also the lead negotiator for ACE for the US government. We work together to reflect the amazing work being done in the United States and the 2 colleagues overseas, and also to bring that work back to the United States for what we need to learn. I think today you see why the ACE coalition is such a critical part of that work, because the richness that was just demonstrated. In my co-focal point role, I work closely with non-governmental agencies and local governments and schools and universities and communities to ensure that ACE work happening domestically is shared with other countries, including the ACE focal points from those countries. So one of my responsibilities is, since 2007, is to contribute the information in the United States national communications to the UNFCCC on ACE. It's been named many things over the years. So the White House just released yesterday our 7th United Nations Framework Convention National Communications, and members of the coalition's work are highlighted there, and others in Chapter 9 of the Climate Education, Engagement, Workforce Development, and Training chapter. Check it out, learn more about it. I'll put that into the chat once I'm done speaking. So you can see that as an official communications, came out yesterday. And check out some of the work that we're doing and the important work we're doing on ACE. Unfortunately, the United States work on ACE historically in the UNFCCC community is not as seen, and we haven't been as present. And so the ACE Coalition is trying to change that. So we appreciate the efforts of the US ACE Coalition to foster knowledge exchange within the United States and abroad. And point to such examples of progress where we share with other countries. You know, it's important how we do that in our national work on ACE, but it's not our work, it's the nation's work. So in my couple of decades and a half of experience in working on climate education, youth engagement, workforce development, I've had the honor to work with so many of these coalition members, and it's a growing coalition. So I represent some of the United States' most effective ACE-focused practices and programs, and some of the best work and some of the most collaborative leaders. And I think you've got that demonstrated here. And so hopefully you get a chance after this event, even though Sherry and I are not with you in person, to exchange, to talk, to learn, to co-benefit from each other. We're in this together. So, and some of them are, others are also here at COP26 who are not on the stage or in the room. So there's some amazing work being done in the United States on ACE, even though we don't call it ACE often. So I hope that we can benefit from the exchange and the best practices we're sharing and learn from each other at COP26, but also how to support this ambitious whole of society effort to tackle the climate crisis when we're back home in our home communities. So thank you for the ACE Coalition, the US ACE Coalition, and I give it back to you. Hopefully I didn't take too much time.
Thank you. So what we'd like to do now is we had the privilege of being able to collaboratively write a paper on the process that we went through to do this coalition work. So Esatis led the paper, I contributed, Haley contributed, and many of the others across the coalition in all different ways. And that paper is part of a special issue for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance that's for this COP. So we were very privileged to be accepted into that issue. And we're going to share with you a couple of the principles that guided the work here. And Satis and I will kind of take turns on this one. So I'll start with the justice and equity. These were the principles that framed our work together and that we would encourage others to frame their ACE work nationally in. So in terms of justice and equity, in the dialogue process and in the resulting ACE strategic planning framework, we sought to acknowledge histories of oppression and actively deconstruct the systems and institutions perpetuating it. We tried to just do things totally differently. Process design iterations help to foster new ways to name and resolve tensions resulting from the histories of colonization, marginalization, and unequal distribution of power. And I should say the histories and the current dynamics of those issues across government, society, and environmental policy. And so now Satis with action-oriented.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think that's one of the most important, because connecting justice to, or justice-centered climate action to ACE was fundamental and a very big highlight of our work. But also we talk about action-oriented. So we're talking about not having transactional actions and work to connect people to actual pathways to implement that knowledge. So it's not only learning, but it's also connecting them to have, okay, so these are actions that you can follow up on, and then, because, okay, so I think that what we aim to do is that, or to convey, is that climate learning without any kind of outlet leads to despair and paralysis. So we want that people have a way to act, because people have the right to act and they have been acting. So we want that all of our framework is not only stick into words, but actually leads to changes and transformation in the system.
Absolutely, and to Felicia's point, when we're thinking about action, we can't be learning and then acting. We need to be learning and acting at the same time and iterating. In terms of coherence, that has been one of the primary reasons for the formation of the coalition. We see a lot of different work going on and recreating of new systems, redoing things again and again. We can learn from each other, from the deep histories of practice in place, and we need to do that. But to do that, we need to build these networks of networks, these learning networks across different places, and that's coherence. So we're really working towards that.
Yeah, and also the coherence that we need in policy. So that coherence both at the different levels of governance. Another of the principles that came out was relationality, that we don't work transactionally with communities, because often we know of projects that come into our communities and they're just following their goal that they want, that have not consulted with the community, and that we actually aim to co-design that process together, and that leads to a more robust strategy. So that's what we mean when we mean relationality. Sorry. So I think that that's a very important principle that came out, in ways that we should transform protocols and ways that we actually engage in climate action.
And to something that Sherry said earlier as well, when we think about rights-based work and we think about working in relation, we're working in relation to each other, we're working in relation to histories, to place, and to do that, we really need to engage in participatory collaborative design processes and practices. And that means that we actually have people at the table with decision-making authority, with the rights to be engaged, and that those decisions that they make are drawing on these multiple ways of knowing and being in the world, so that we're not having one science define all solutions. All right, and I think we're back to you.
Hello. Thank you. Wow. What a whirlwind of awesomeness. I really appreciate you all being here today. And I also, just thinking back on all the information that was shared, the stories that were shared, and thinking about, I think, really the idea of a coalition that is needed, that we can all join. I was inspired this morning by actually an article Frank had shared with us, and I wanted to just read a quote from it that Chad Frischman from Drawdown Solutions had written. And he wrote, "Making a difference in climate is all about building coalitions and working collaboratively. Bringing together as many and as wide a variety of stakeholders as possible to work hand in hand is the best, perhaps the only, way to truly move the needle on a problem of this magnitude. This is a race to zero, and we must link arms together to get on track and achieve the 1.5 degree climate target." So I challenge all of you to link together with us. We'd love to have you join the coalition. In fact, we may have a pin for you if you sign up today. We have a barcode, and we'd love to have you join us at 2 of the other panels that members of the coalition will be facilitating here at the U.S. Climate Action Center in the next week or 2. And we'd also love to hear from you. What do you need from the U.S. Climate Coalition? What U.S. ACE Coalition, I should say. What can you share with us? And this is a Mentimeter, so if you take a picture with your phone, it should take you to a question, that question, if you want to answer it. And with that, we do have 3 more minutes if there was any questions or, yes, Felicia.
I just wanted, maybe Deb, you, anybody, we de-emphasize education, but I just want to say I work with historically black colleges and universities with a network of pretty much science-based faculty, and also K-12 teaching and learning about climate, and so that attracts lots of people to the ACE network. We de-emphasize it because coalition building and working across communities is at the core. So it's not all about education and somehow the E, people feel education. But I just wanted to bring that back around because it's really an important piece of the core.
I appreciate that, yeah.
And maybe just to stress that, one of the ways to think about education inside ACE and actually center community is to think of how we actually engage schools and communities in local coalition building so that schools are the center of community efforts. And we know, especially with adolescents are change agents in their families and their communities. And so if we are doing a K-12 wide climate change, all grade levels, all subjects, we are going to get communities moving in significant ways. However, if we are doing that, we cannot be doing the current sort of colonial models of schooling. We need to be thinking about new and innovative ways that actually disrupt educational injustices as well. So thanks.
Sherry, please.
I just wanted to add a comment to the end. I know we had talked about doing this when we were discussing this to really think about, when we're thinking about education, it doesn't have to be traditional forms of education. There's all kinds of ways to educate ourselves. And one of the things that my organization has done is we've trained over 2,000 scientists, scientific scholars, environmental advocates and activists from 40 different countries on how, what are the best practices for engaging cross-culturally with one another. How do we improve our relationships with one another? You know, the educational component, it spans all of these boundaries. And that's one of the beauties of ACE, is that why is it important for us to have ACE, to have a coalition like this? Because our organization being able to reach 50,000 people in a year, which seems like a tremendous amount locally, is a drop in a bucket nationally. And when you look globally, it's barely even a noticeable ripple. But when you combine all of the organizations together and you bring all of those voices together and all of that reach together, then you're making real change. And the beauty of ACE is that it's moving us all from aspiration to action, as Felicia said. And that's where we need to be. So I just wanted to add that on the end. So thank you.
That's a drop the mic moment for Sherry. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you all for coming.